Hello, and welcome. You are watching Prime Pulse News USA. Headline: U.S. demands G7 and EU impose tariffs on China and India to stop Russian oil purchases. In recent days, the United States has launched a new diplomatic and economic push, urging G7 and European Union allies to take tougher action against countries still doing business with Russia. The goal is clear: to shut down Moscow's oil revenues and cut off the money fueling its war in Ukraine. Let's start a call to G7 and EU. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer are pressing G7 and EU partners to introduce what they call meaningful tariffs on goods from countries that continue to buy Russian oil. Washington argues that both China and India are directly financing Putin's war machine through their purchases. Source: Reuters. Tariffs already in place. The U.S. has already announced a sharp hike on Indian imports, adding another 25% in tariffs, raising the total to around 50% on some products. China, however, is facing a more complicated situation. While the administration is demanding tougher penalties, ongoing trade disputes have delayed a full-scale tariff increase. Source: Reuters. Trump's NATO push. Former President Donald Trump has stepped in with his own demands, calling on NATO members to stop buying Russian oil altogether. He argues that if NATO stands united, it will open the door to even tougher sanctions against Moscow and send a strong signal to Beijing. Trump insists NATO must take a coordinated stance, cut off Russian oil and impose steep tariffs on Chinese goods. Sources: CBS News, Reuters. G7 finance ministers debate. At a recent summit, G7 finance ministers discussed additional sanctions against Russia and explored ways to use frozen Russian sovereign assets, billions of dollars in state funds blocked abroad since the Ukraine invasion, to support Kyiv's war effort and long-term recovery. Sources: Reuters, Financial Times analysis. Strategic goal: the U.S. believes Russia's war is being bankrolled largely through oil revenues and advanced exports. Cutting off that cash flow, Washington argues, could make it much harder for Moscow to sustain the fight. Challenges and pushback. Economic fallout. Countries still dependent on Russian oil, such as Hungary, Slovakia, and Turkey, could face energy shortages and higher prices. Trade war risks. Both China and India are expected to retaliate, raising fears of a wider trade war that could shake global markets. Diplomatic tensions. Some nations warn that cutting Russian oil is not realistic in the short term, citing energy security and price stability as top concerns. What's next? If G7 and EU allies follow Washington's lead, tariffs on Chinese and Indian goods could rise sharply, intensifying global trade disputes. Russia, meanwhile, could be hit with another wave of powerful sanctions, targeting international banking systems, global trade routes, and even frozen state assets. But resistance within NATO and the EU remains likely. Some members fear the economic backlash could hit them harder than Moscow, especially those still struggling to replace Russian energy. Closing. This growing battle over oil, tariffs, and sanctions shows just how determined Washington is to choke off Moscow's war chest. But sweeping measures like these are never easy to pull off. The coming weeks will be critical, as G7, EU, and NATO leaders weigh their options. The balance between economic security, political unity, and the future of the Ukraine war hangs in the balance. You're watching Prime Pulse News USA. Stay with us and don't forget to subscribe, because your source for what's trending, what's changing, and what's next in America.